With the first Ratchet & Clank game, Insomniac Games proved themselves capable of making a truly next-gen experience, of making a game with shooter elements, and of moving on from the purple dragon that had launched them to success in the first place. However, as I said in my review, it wasn't without various issues. The concept had a ton of potential and the game itself was very fun, but it definitely lent itself to many improvements in an eventual sequel. And unlike nowadays, where we have to wait the better part of a decade to see sequels to our favorite games, the follow-up to Ratchet & Clank, ingeniously titled Going Commando, came out the very next year in 2003. That is, of course, unless you live in Europe, where they just called it Ratchet & Clank 2. Boring! So does Going Commando manage to fix the frustrating failures that just barely held the last game back from greatness? Or will it tear itself apart with flaws like a pair of Ratchet's underwear? Let's grab a wrench, hop in our constantly redesigned spaceships, and find out. First off, the visuals and music are for the most part more of the same, though obviously slight improvements have been made. Levels are more expansive, with more impressive visuals, more unique character to each area, and truly masterful music to accompany your journey. But what it really comes down to here is the gameplay, where a truly groundbreaking change has been made: the addition of strafing. This seemingly insignificant new mechanic completely shifts the entire dynamic of combat. Aiming no longer sucks complete and utter Lombax lard, and enemies can be designed around your new ability to lock into a specific position and move from side to side. Especially in some of this game's later levels, this really makes for intense, engaging combat that is incomparable with that of the first game. I enjoyed the combat in that one, but this is a whole new level with more intricate design than ever before, and once again, a great selection of weapons. This prevents the game from feeling too difficult or unfair, as well as the combat is more robust, with more opportunities for you to gain the upper hand through skill and dedication, rather than the random crapshoot of trying to get the first game's aiming reticle to work. And in the same vein, the addition of upgrades has a huge positive impact on the game's overall difficulty and fun factor. Not only does your health upgrade as you kill enemies, which can be an absolute lifesaver and which adds to a great feeling of progression, but your weapons also turn into entirely new versions of themselves once you've used them enough. This feature is absolutely fantastic and almost means that the game has twice the amount of weapons available, since some of the upgraded versions are quite disruptive changes. For example, the blaster goes from a pistol to a massive Gatling gun, and I'd say that's quite a big upgrade. Additionally, you gradually unlock upgrades for Ratchet's wrench over the course of the main story and gain access to armor sets that protect you from taking as much damage, both of which keep things balanced throughout the game. That is, if you have a crap ton of bolts. The gameplay overall is mainly more of the same greatness, but they really have upped the ante in tons of ways and made big improvements. One difference with the previous game is already clear in the game's opening level, Eranos. Going Commando immediately showcases how it's much more focused on combat than platforming in many areas. Of course, there's still platforming and many other gameplay aspects, but it's definitely moved further away from Insomniac's platforming origins than ever before. In general, that first level serves as a solid introduction to the game and its new mechanics, while also not overwhelming the player, as they keep Ratchet & Clank separated at this stage in the game, which allows us to get into the groove of things more methodically. But the game really kicks off when we get to the next level of Uzla. This is a fantastic stage that is made so much more unique and fun due to the challenging platforming, which is contextualized within the level's world itself, as well as the introduction of the brand new tractor beam puzzles, which have you moving blocks and platforms around with a massive array. Sure, it's not the most exciting idea ever, but it really makes for a fun new mechanic, and I always love coming back to this level when I replay the game, possibly because it's one of the best levels for platforming in this otherwise more combat-centered experience. However, it also introduces us to one of the game's biggest flaws, the bosses. The bosses were also very lame in the last game, but here they might be even worse, with many of them dying far too easily and having almost nothing to them. Their attacks are far too repetitive, and the ones that actually take more than 30 seconds to beat are terrible in the exact opposite way. But more on that later. And after this, we're introduced to yet another new mechanic, and in my controversial, edgy Redditor opinion, a major flaw, the ship segments. The first game had these too, of course, but here there are multiple entire levels dedicated to them with multiple challenges, amazing set pieces to fly in, and even a damn upgrade system. The effort they put in here is commendable, and I'm not against the idea, but the ship levels can also be very frustrating due to the fact that they work in a very weird way. You see, in the first game, you were always required to just focus on targets in front of you, which made it like an arcadey experience, relying on your reactions and quick aiming abilities. But in Going Commando, you'll constantly have multiple ships absolutely blowing you to smithereens from behind. That did not sound right, and it can be very frustrating until you find out that you're supposed to flip around them to get them in front of you repeatedly. It's not like it ruins the game or anything, but I don't see why they changed what was already a perfectly fine setup. Maybe they thought it would make the game feel more realistic? You know? The game about a space cat and a talking robot that saved the universe? But at least with the following level, we're granted one of the best additions to this whole damn franchise, the arenas. Maktar Nebula itself is already a truly great level, introducing us to the fantastic, intense, reaction-based electrolyzer puzzles, as well as these awesome and incredibly innovative moon areas that you can traverse and complete challenges on, which paved the way for the best part of my favorite game in this entire franchise. But it's made a true masterpiece by the inclusion of the first ever arena, which sees us competing in various fun combat challenges for bolts, story items, or random collectibles. On planet Endako, we're finally reunited with Clank, granting us the great platforming possibilities that we're used to, but not before we have to mess about with some new Clank segments, which are, once again, perfectly okay and not much else. They're slightly more in-depth and fun, but really nothing to write home about. At least this planet proves that the grind rail segments are alive and better than ever, but with the following destination of Barlow, we get even more new stuff thrown at us. Seriously, this game is so full of new fun stuff to do that you'll never get bored, and yet it also makes sure to have these mechanics or gameplay styles come up a few times so they don't just feel like random one-offs. It grants them a level of symmetry that's important for making sure the variety doesn't turn hollow. On Barlow, it's the new Therminator puzzles, which see you freezing and unfreezing water at strategic times to get around, which is really put to use with some challenging, brilliant level design in subsequent levels. And not to be outdone, the extremely enjoyable speeder races, which I found to be far more fun and fair than the last game's hoverboarding, as I seldom experienced cheap deaths or crashes, instead just having to perfect a very clear and addictive method to win. It's great. The following levels do a great job of capitalizing on mechanics introduced earlier on, fusing them with fantastic new visual spectacle and atmosphere, from the almost Christmas-esque Siberius to the sprawling and high-tech No-Tac. But it's Tabora where the second half of the game really kicks off, throwing us into a desert wasteland with awesome new enemy designs, these incredibly hard but very gratifying and enjoyable hang glider segments, and an absolutely awesome open area that we get to explore in and hunt for crystals. At this point in the game, things just ramp up in terms of challenge and the level of precision expected of the player, which allows for a truly ideal difficulty curve, and I absolutely adore some of the tough but fair combat and platforming segments on planets like Joba, Bolden, and Todano, where you get to fight angry mutant squirrels. Beautiful. Bolden in particular is a real son of a gun with some truly brutal combat encounters, but if you stick with it, reaching the end is so satisfying, not to mention how awesome it is that you can now fight enemies in anti-gravity with ledges recontextualized as cover. But once you get this far, there's no longer that much of a focus on throwing new stuff into the mix apart from the cool but somewhat underutilized jetpack, instead granting us more and more tough, engaging fights in which we must prevail, and dizzying heights that we must scale. And I'm perfectly happy with that, as levels like Snivelac in particular put on full display the quality of the basic gameplay in Going Commando, as well as some of its less ideal aspects. Yes, the difficulty is somewhat of an issue here at a certain point. Now, I mostly love the way they balanced it, but Snivelac sticks out as a really jarring spike, which kind of makes the experience more frustrating. However, at the same time, we now have various opportunities to gather bolts, whether that be by searching for crystals in the desert or fighting enemies in the arena, which allows for weapons and armor that make things much more doable. This provides the player with an incentive to keep playing the game and to experience the side content, whereas the first game just required you to grind the hell out of it if you wanted to collect extra bolts. So in the end, I guess it's not really much of an issue at all. God damn it, this game is so good that even my issues turn into positives. Okay, but to be honest, the boss fight on Snivelac is actually pretty terrible. This is widely acknowledged to be the worst of this already bad collection of bosses, and I can see why. So slow, boring, and monotonous, it just goes on for far too long, whereas the others are way too short. I guess they just never found the sweet spot. But on a more important note, who the hell are Ratchet and Clank even fighting in this game? Well, Drek is gone and doesn't return, so we're actually faced with a wholly new plot here. It starts out with our heroes being transported to a brand new galaxy in order to protect a major corporation named Megacorp, a bit on the nose there, from losing their valuable new experiment, which just so happens to be a blue little furry pet creature. So they set out to stop a mysterious thief and their gang of reptilian mercenaries from stealing the little fuzzball, which results in the introduction of various new charming characters, such as the leader of the mercenary group, which is known as Thugs for Less.
Also, be on the lookout for these two characters. I have a personal interest in seeing them rubbed out, so I'm offering a free pizza party to the squad who bags them. And remember, that includes drinks and desserts.
I love how much they amp up the satire and social commentary here, going straight for the jugular with their critiques of consumerism and providing tons of solid jokes, especially with the even better cast of wacky side characters on each level. However, at the same time, there's no longer any deeper character development like in the last game. This for sure opens up a strong debate about whether you prefer the development of the first game or the humor of the second game, but for me, it's actually Going Commando that's better, due to the simple fact that the seemingly inept old man who owns Megacorp, Mr. Fizzwidget, who's hilarious in his own right, turns out to be none other than Captain Quark. Wishing to become a hero by releasing the experiment, which is actually a dangerous monster, to the galaxy, and then playing himself up as the hero by stopping it, he reveals himself as the true villain at the end, which I just find so hilarious and such a fun twist. There are some minor nitpicks I have with this game along the way, little issues here or there, but that's something you can say about every game ever made, and what it comes down to is that Ratchet & Clank Going Commando is a total blast. This game is fun as hell, expands upon the foundation set by the first game as well as improves upon its issues, adds iconic new mechanics and ideas that will become vital to the series' identity later on, grants us a hilarious piece of satire with its story, and continues to impress visually. Going Commando is the complete package, maybe without the rapping, with tons to experience, see, do, and enjoy, from the very opening to the final boss, which, by the way, is actually great compared to the other bosses. It's stuck with me in all the right ways. You know, like underwear in your crack. It is a huge step for the series and a must-play for the PS2. I give it a 5 out of 5 despite its flaws because, screw it. It's fun.